Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel, Looking for a New Love. My name is Kristi Chadwick. I'm the director of the Ballston Community Public Library in New York, and I'll be your moderator today. This panel features romances ranging from slow burns to rom-coms, stories inspired by pop culture, sports, and modern relationships. So without further ado, let me introduce our panel. We'll start with Lavanya Lakshmi, author of Leave and Come Back by Pam Dorman Books. We have Anna McCallie, Abby Offsides from Dell. Elizabeth O'Rourke, Good at Being Alive, also from Dell. And Edward Schmit, The Open Era by Berkley. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So I'm going to jump right into it. Let's start with Anna. Why don't you give us a brief summary of about at Abby Offsides?
Great. Thanks so much. This is great to join everybody. Abby Offsides is a friends to lovers romance about an American woman who decides to radically reboot her life after a broken engagement. She moves to England, to Liverpool, to take a job with a professional soccer team, even though she's never followed that sport before. And she builds new platonic and romantic connections with the players, and one in particular, as she figures out what makes her happy, who she wants to be, and who she wants to be with in this new and better version of herself.
Terrific. I mean, Abby, I just loved her from the beginning. And I have to say, starting off with literally running away, she went from Boston, as you said, over to Liverpool. She herself notes that her life isn't a Hallmark movie, but really, with that opening, how could it not be? But why did you want to start with her making such a dramatic leap from the beginning?
Yeah, I think it had to be a really big swing. She finds out her fiance is cheating on her. She calls off the engagement and she's on the plane to Liverpool all in the span of about a week. And I think part of that is a knee-jerk reaction and this practical element of like, oh, I don't want to run into this guy who's just broken my heart if we're still in the same city. But more importantly, there's a part of it that is she just knows she has to do such a dramatic leap if she's ever going to get out of the rut that she's in. She's got to use this as an opportunity to make a clean break from the version of her life that put her into this little box where she wasn't happy and she was just kind of going along because that's the routine she was in. And she has to push herself out of her comfort zone, which in her case means this really big life altering move across the ocean. I was thinking about it the other day as kind of like an emotional cold plunge where it's not necessarily going to be pleasant, but it's a radical change, and hopefully you see some benefits on the other side.
Definitely. And I hope that when people start picking this book up, that we're going to hear some of these radical stories from some of our readers too. I think that would be terrific.
Yeah.
Lavanya, let's talk about Leave and Come Back.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristi. Hi, librarians. Leave and Come Back follows Simran, who is estranged from her family and is going back home for the first time in 7 years, sort of the opposite journey that Abby's character is making, or Abby's making, rather. She's going back home for the first time in 7 years for her cousin's wedding, and her return already sets off family drama, which is only exacerbated when her brand new boyfriend, Leo, accidentally crashes the wedding and immediately pisses off the family matriarch, Veena Auntie. So Simran and her cousins rally together with a scheme based off of their favorite Bollywood movie. Leo and Simran will pretend to be strangers, and he'll win over the family as the most helpful, most charming guest ever. Hijinks ensue because, of course, they do. Because the usually popular, confident Leo can't seem to do anything right, and he and Simran are constantly watched by the neighborhood aunties. But along with the hijinks come some heartfelt revelations and a whole bunch of secrets, all in the midst of this 2 week long multi event 400 attendee wedding, which is truly the event of the season.
Yeah, it definitely was. And as you said, Simran, she ran away, very much like Abby. She left her aunt and her uncle and her cousins. And it revolved around family also, about her parents' death when she was a teen. So why did you want to establish this family division as your starting point?
Yeah, a couple of things. There's this like old adage where you should start a character the furthest from where they're going to end up. So this physically sort of gave her a lot of time and distance from this family. And I think her biggest wound is that her extended family never acknowledged or mourned her parents' passing, and that taught her to never really acknowledge it herself. So she boxed her grief up away. She kind of turned it into this wall and eventually, when it got too difficult to do that around the people that used to know her parents, her family, she ran away. At the start of the book, she's been gone for 7 years, and all those 7 years has done is to like not solve any of those problems, but just sort of solidify that wall that she's put up so many years ago. In this case, distance doesn't make the heart grow fonder; it just makes the heart grow more distant. And I think I've seen estrangements like this, and it haunts people, the people who leave, the people who are left behind. It sort of is like this bruise that's never allowed to heal, but keeps on getting pressed. And so that felt so emotionally rich to have her then also return at a heightened time, like a big wedding when there's so many different things happening. It just sort of set up perfectly for really, really juicy family drama.
Yes, and it just got juicier by the page for sure. Thank you. Elizabeth, let's hear about Good at Being Alive.
So Good at Being Alive is an enemies to lovers forced proximity romance between Bex and Theo, Theo is who owns the UK side of a travel agency. Bex has had a family tragedy and inherited the US side. And they are struggling, as many travel agencies these days are. So they go on to this reality television show where they're pretending that they're actually on their honeymoon as they travel to destinations. And they absolutely loathe each other in the process.
Oh, yes, you could see that from the beginning. I mean, as you said, you start off with Bex having to deal with her family tragedy, and then she meets Theo in a very unusual way, in a very unusual place. And it definitely was the antithesis of a meet cute for sure. So, was this always how you had set up their initial meeting?
I always wanted them to meet at a point where they didn't know who the other was, right? They had so many preconceived ideas about the other. She thinks that he has this stick up his and he thinks that she's crazy and irresponsible and always getting thrown into jail, and none of this is true. So I wanted the reader to be able to see them the way they would have seen each other without any of this history. And of course there's this immediate attraction, and then they realize it's this person they've been hating, and so they have to spend several chapters pretending that they weren't attracted in the first place.
And it's a very long road for them, quite literally, with airplane rides and many countries. Edward, thanks for joining us. Tell us about the open era.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me, Kristi and Library Journal. Also, I dedicated my book to my grandparents, who are both librarians. So you all have a special place in my heart. So thank you very much for what you do. My name is Edward Schmit. I wrote a book called The Open Era. I like to pitch it in three simple words: epic, gay, tennis. It's a queer sports romance. It follows a 20-year-old Austin Hardy, who becomes the first openly gay male tennis player to compete in a Grand Slam. Um, he came out in high school. It was no big deal. But when he qualifies for the US Open, which is the largest tennis tournament in the world, he makes history just by being who he is. All of the media attention turns straight to him. His anxiety disorder takes a turn for the worse, and he trips and falls at practice right next to the very talented, very handsome, probably straight world number two, Diego Cruz. The two of them start a friendship off the court, maybe something more than a friendship, maybe something much more than a friendship. But the problem is they stand directly in each other's way for the trophy at the US Open. It all takes place over 2 weeks right here in New York City, where I live.
Yeah, I love all of these kind of shorter time frames that you have for many of the books here. And as you said, you have both Austin and Diego, and they're really both in the public eye dealing with, the Grand Slam and the US Open. So why did you decide to make both of these, love interests very prominent in the public eye?
I wanted to write a book about athletes, tennis players, and like if you're in the top 100, if you're competing in like the largest tennis tournaments in the world, you're just naturally there. You're doing press conferences after every match. So like the publicness of it all was just like, yeah, this is their life. Now Austin is much lower ranked than Diego, so he's not been in the public eye, but suddenly he gets thrust into that and has to deal with media asking questions about his sexuality and not him almost breaking a sort of record. And he has to sort of deal with, he has to do, has a lot of quick, fast lessons in media training very quickly. Yeah, it was interesting for me to explore what that would be like having, they're like very young tennis players and they're still learning a lot and learning how to present themselves and how much of themselves to present in public.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember watching tennis when I was younger with younger athletes too, and it's just amazing what they go through. And so that really brought this home in your book too. So thank you. Lavanya, I'm going to go back to you because, as you said, Simran and Leo are basically established as a new couple at the beginning of the book. There were definitely growing pains through the story. So, why did you decide to start them as a connected couple instead of, the usual what we see the falling in love throughout the book?
Yeah. The number one rule of romance is the happy ending, right? The happily ever after. And that's basically the only rule in romance, which is what makes it so wonderful. And I really abide by that. I love that rule. And when I was writing the story, I was thinking about structure and character a bit. And I had this like thought, which was how does the character know that they're at their own happily ever after? It's because the writer is writing it at the end of the book. Um, and then from there, I sort of spun out into this other thought, which was like, what if a character thought they were having their happy ending, but it's actually not? What if there was something that looked like a happy ending right at the beginning of the book, but there was actually a ton more conflict to get through before that was actually like the true happy ending? Um, and so that's how, like, Simran and Leo, as you said, get together pretty much in the first chapter. And where the reader finds them is that they have just culminated this, like, slow burn, friends to lovers romance. And they both sort of think, like, oh, we're together. This is it. This is it for us. Um, but I kind of love the idea of them being wrong about that. And in many relationships, the work of love, the act of loving someone, of joining your lives comes after that first getting together, where your issues and unaddressed traumas and viewpoints you have to figure out your life together. And so in this book, that's Simran's issues with her family, and to a lesser extent, Leo's issues with abandonment. So they're together, but they still have to work through these things to actually have a healthy, lasting relationship, which is the actual happy ending. And it also allowed me to invert a really fun romance trope. So instead of fake dating, which, where they're not together, but they pretend to be, these two are fake not dating. They're totally together, but they have to pretend not to be. And that was just a blast to write.
Yeah, it really came out in the story. So I loved having that connection at the beginning and seeing them try to pretend not to know each other. There is some definite hijinks in that. Elizabeth, as you said, Bex obviously she carries a lot of baggage as the irresponsible daughter, which had been kind of ingrained into her by her family at an early age. And as you said, Theo kind of leans into it because this is all he's ever heard before meeting her. But then he finds out Bex is actually incredibly smart and incredibly capable underneath all the drama, because there, of course, is still drama. How did you want them both to grow through that change of perception with them?
So I think that obviously I wanted Bex to finally come into her own, right? Like I wanted her to become this person that she'd always been capable of being if she had been raised in a different household and hadn't had these family dynamics at play. And for Theo, it was more subtle because the book is really about Bex for the most part. But for Theo, he was very guarded. And I think the only way he was ever going to get over that was kind of by force. And what Bex really needed was to have one person in the world who would publicly be in her corner. And that required him to finally, lay down his armor and be what she needed.
For sure. Definitely you saw that grow through the entire book. Um, Edward, you mentioned that Austin is dealing with an anxiety disorder, and I was blown away by how it was handled throughout the book because we actually got to see a lot of it, both from his internal perspective and how it affected him externally. Did you have to do specific research, or were there experiences that you used to build that part of the character?
Yeah, I just did a bunch of research on myself. A lot of his symptoms his anxiety disorder are quite similar to mine, and I'm not one for like journaling about my mental health. So I thought that I might try channeling it through the character of Austin. So like a lot of his thoughts and symptoms of anxiety are slightly similar to mine. It is fiction. But yeah, and it's a huge part of his identity, and it's in many ways stands directly in his way of what he wants in the book. To be the best tennis player he possibly can, and also to have a relationship with someone that maybe he should not be pursuing for reasons that could be detrimental to his career. It's hard to fall in love with someone you're in direct competition with your entire career.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Anna, Abby was given actually a list by her friends, her best friend and his wife, of things to do to help her search for happiness. It was very similar to a bucket list, but there was some really interesting things on that list. So, what was the importance to you of kind of establishing this list and really how it threaded through your novel?
Yeah, Abby's friends, Josh and Erica, the ones who make the list, are the kind of extremely hands-on friends who would drive to your house and like literally pull you up and off the couch if you were in a funk. So I think when Josh realizes Abby is going to move 3,000 miles away, he's like, well, that's not compatible with my friendship style. So what do how do I make sure that she knows that we're supporting her even from afar? And so they're giving her this roadmap to happiness, at least in their conception of happiness, which probably involves a few too many like triathlons for Abby's tastes. But when she's at her lowest and very lonely in this brand new country, she has this piece of home that can help her through the rough parts. I mean, like construction wise, it was a really nice framing device for her journey and her growth as a character, that she can physically check these things off the list as she pushes herself in this rebuilding effort. And it was really important for me that she had her own growth arc outside of Lachlan, and that it wasn't motivated by wanting to be better for him. It was motivated by wanting to be better for herself. And so to have that support from her friends, even in just list format, was really important to me.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth, we're going to bounce back to you. You mentioned some of the tropes right at the very beginning with your pitch, but I loved the fake marriage trope. I've seen that before, and just the different ways that you can do it is fun, especially when you have to present that to the public. So, why did that particular trope come up for you, especially when dealing with this entire TV travel plot, and also kind of, the group that is kind of seeding behind them, the baby makes three group behind them for doing that?
So I needed to come up with some kind of forced proximity set for this. And I could have made it an office romance, but I think office romances are really difficult. I've written them before. And first of all, unless you've worked in that industry for a while, you're inevitably going to get a million reviews where they're like, she has clearly never done this before. Like you write a romance set in a hospital and somebody's like, oh, she's never done this. Or oh, I've done like legal stuff and somebody's like, hasn't she ever heard of practice groups? So there was the whole element of not wanting to have to learn that much and still mess it up.
Mhm.
But the writing the travel part was just more fun. Like you get to live vicariously through them. I live in DC. It's like gross 8 months out of the year. So this way I could kind of live vicariously through their adventures. But it also allowed sort of Bex's brilliance to shine, right? She's got all these bizarre facts and she reads almanacs and she would probably have hidden it in an office setting. But when she's just out in the world, she can, tell you like the history of the catacombs because she just happens to know it. And so it's sort of like she's sort of, lets the walls down a little bit, sort of accidentally.
It's just her coming up with all of these facts and information through it was just really amazing. And I love learning that stuff along in a fiction book too. So I think that's a really great part of it.
It was fun for me actually because like I had
Yeah.
gone to most of these places with my kids, but I didn't know half this stuff until I researched it afterwards. So I wish I had known going in, but
We always find out after we go. So Lavanya, the setting of your novel is a big Indian wedding, as you mentioned, and it's full of customs and traditions. And even right at the beginning of the copy that I read, it really went through what was happening step by step for the wedding. So, why did you choose this particular setting for the book?
Yeah. Similar to what Elizabeth said, like write what you know. It's a little easier on the research front too. And in this case, I've been to a lot of Indian weddings. I've been to a lot of weddings in general and Indian weddings in particular. In fact, the couple in this book, getting married in this book, is like loosely based on two of my best friends and their wedding, which I was heavily involved in. So I got to see like all the ins and outs, and I knew the families and stuff. So it was just so natural and easy to write about, and I didn't have to do a ton of research, which is not my favorite part of writing a book, except to like call my parents and be like, did I spell this thing correctly? Did I pronounce this thing correctly? Um, and I think, you see right at the beginning of the book, there's this like very intense invitation that lists out like 10 events. And I really wanted everyone to get a sense of like, when we say 5 day multi-event wedding, like you're busy for like a week celebrating these people and celebrating with these people. Um, and the ceremonies, the colors, the sound, the outfits, the food, it's like such a sensory experience that it was really, really fun to be able to write those details. And I think I kind of hoped that if you haven't been to an Indian wedding, you read this book and by the end of it, you're kind of like, okay, I feel like I've been to one, which was really fun. And then the other thing was like, it was really fun to play with some of these ceremonies and tether them to the character beats. So like the characters are going through stuff, but in the meanwhile, they have to be at these ceremonies. So, for example, the Mehndi ceremony, which is when people put Mehndi or henna on their hands, the main characters, Leo and Simran, are like finally, for the first time in the whole book, actually getting a moment where they're like actually truly alone. And they're kind of, like they want a romantic moment, but her hands are covered in fresh Mehndi, which will like smear and stain anything if she touches it. So like, it was just really fun to keep on finding ways to pull them in polar opposite directions because of the wedding stuff.
And now that you've mentioned that the wedding was kind of based on your friends, did they know this before you launched the book?
They have recently gotten ARC, so I expect some texts next week.
Well, they definitely will after this show. So love that. Edward, so what we also see with Austin and Diego is that they both have encountered this kind of, the work versus life balance that always seems to be difficult with people who are in the spotlight, and I'm sure people who travel and do sports. So, how did you want the influences of their own thinking about this balance and that of others, which we saw representation of, to play into affecting their relationship.
Yeah, I think when you're a professional athlete at that level, there is hardly any work-life balance, and I think that's why a lot of, especially in tennis, because the season is almost year-round. There's no like tennis season; it's always tennis season. And balancing life and like just doing things that you enjoy that is good for your mental health is difficult on the tour, and I think that that kind of really comes to a head for both of those characters, just trying to navigate like the pressure of this extremely like competitive tournament. But we do have like moments of like brevity and relief from that. Like there's a fun go-kart scene where they kind of escape to do some go-karting in New Jersey, because I found like there are no, in researching it, like I was like, oh, I'm gonna send them to do go-karts. Where surely there's somewhere in New York where you can do that. Nope, you have to go to Jersey. So we go over to Jersey and we ride some go-karts and have fun, and it's a nice work-life balance there. But when you're in the middle of a tournament, there's hardly any life. So it was hard to like sneak in those like times where they could actually hang out together, because this is a new friendship between the two of them. And a lot of it is just like hotel room hangs, because like that's, you finish a match and it's 11 p.m. and like there's not much else to do. But then other fun things can happen late night at hotel rooms.
Definitely. Anna, Abby and Lachlan, this is a slow burn pair for sure. And what I really enjoyed is that they built a strong friendship. Really kind of before the attraction comes into play. You saw little bits of it, but that friendship really came through. So, how important do you think their friendship was into establishing their relationship and how you built it?
Their friendship was the absolutely the most important thing for me in the whole book. I knew that if I didn't get that right, there wasn't any point in having them fall in love. And I know it's complicated, and Lachlan being married at the start of the book makes things really difficult. But I just felt so strongly that these two people were destined to be together in some form. They're both so lonely in this new city. They're both experiencing that really sharp, singular grief that comes from the end of a relationship. And that's the initial spark that brings them together. And then it's just this intense connection and this gravity that keeps pulling them back to each other over and over again. And as they take these tentative steps towards becoming the best versions of themselves, I think they're also starting to take these tentative steps towards each other as well. But I didn't want Abby to even think about a romantic attachment until she was already in love with him as a friend. It was the most important part of the book for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just love some of their hijinks and just the way that they connected throughout the book as that burned through. So thanks. Elizabeth, what I did, even though you said that this is not, really Theo's book, we did see some of his point of view. You used both Bex and Theo. So what made you decide to give both of their perspectives in the book?
So Bex has repressed so much of who she is, that she can't see herself clearly. So I wanted the reader to be able to start to see her clearly by seeing her through Theo's eyes, and it's Theo who points out these inconsistencies to her, like, hey, you claim to be this, and yet, you claim to be so irresponsible, and yet you are so prepared, you've never been late. Like, so the reader is seeing it before Bex does, and I think because of that kind of, it develops that like hope that she'll find herself in the end.
Yeah, thank you. Edward, you mentioned at the beginning, tennis has had many players actually come out through the years, but most of them have been women. In fact, it's really only been the last couple of years that we have seen male tennis players being public about their sexuality. So, did you feel that it was really important to have this as a point in your book also?
Yeah, it's the past 1 to 2 years that we
Hmm.
we have two out professional male tennis players in tennis, and I was one of them. He's from Brazil, and he played qualifying of the U.S. Open last year, which is exactly how Austin gets into the U.S. Open. So I was like, I have to be here for this match. This is the coolest thing. So I was there, and it really was the coolest thing. And he's continuing to do very well, and I think that he'll continue to play qualifiers through the next Grand Slams. And I think that we will very, very soon see the first openly gay man play in a Grand Slam, which will be amazing. I was interested in telling uh, I wanted to tell a being out story, not a coming out story. A lot of my favorite films and books are coming out stories. They inspired me to come out. They gave me confidence. But I really wanted to, what I found interesting was like living as your authentic self in the public eye and how you have to navigate in a world that's sort of obsessed with like knowing people's sexuality, especially in sports, and like Austin struggles with like all of that attention and the questions that he gets. And he struggles with being a poster boy a little bit. There's a lot of pressure that's put on this 20-year-old kid to kind of represent an entire identity.
Yeah.
And he's not prepared for that, and he doesn't want it. But he also, on the other hand, understands that he's got young kids who are like looking up to him as a role model. So he really has to reckon with that.
Yeah, and I really liked how you put those particular points through the book also, and kind of recognizing why he is important to other people during his matches. So thank you. Lavanya, Simran is nothing but stubborn. From staying away from her family for 7 years. So it really has interfered with her family, but also it is interfering with her relationship with Leo and reconnecting with her cousins, and obviously her aunt and uncle. So how did that really come about? Did you really have that as like a piece of her personality from the beginning?
Yeah. Oh my God. She's so stubborn. And it actually made me realize that maybe I'm more stubborn than I think I was because there were things that I put in there. And then my agent and my editors were like, what's this thing? And I was like, oh, that's a normal reaction. And they were like, no, she's like a brick wall in this scene. And I was like, oh no, oh no. So I think, it made me realize a little bit about my line of where really stubborn is. But I think it's a defense mechanism with her. In her case, she's stubborn because at 15, which is such a like prime developmental phase, she went through this really huge tragedy, lost her parents, and then she also had to leave her home in India and move over to the US. So not only did she sort of lose her emotional stability in her parents, she also lost everything around her. Like our whole world changed. There's this very clear sort of BC AD divide in her life, I think, that she feels very deeply. Um, and I think the fear of ever feeling like that again, of ever being destabilized like that again, makes her really protective of the core self that like got her through that time and that has gotten her through that time since. And so she's really stubborn. But one of the most like frustrating, beautiful things about people who love us is that they change us, sometimes in day by day ways, sometimes in one fell swoop. Their love for us loving them back. It's sort of a deeply human friction that is wonderful and difficult. And her stubbornness is like a resistance to letting any of that ever affect her so that she can just remain protected. And so even when she falls for Leah, who's like the love of her life, she believes she can do it within the confines of like her emotional protective cage, which she cannot.
Yeah, and definitely we see that kind of start to peel off her as you go through the book, and it just was really quite revelatory, showing her how she missed things throughout her life because of it. Anna, Abby's relationship with Lachlan is wonderful, but we also had this interesting parallel. Obviously, she had a broken engagement because of something that happened. And now all of a sudden she is facing a new relationship where kind of the same thing is happening. Um, did you decide to set that up deliberately from the beginning? And how did you want her to kind of learn from that?
Yeah, there's there's so many answers to this. I think the short answer is, as I was drafting it, I always knew that he was going to be involved with someone, and I was pretty sure he was going to be married. But then as I was drafting it, he like three of my really close friends were going through divorce. And in all three cases, it wasn't for any sort of salacious, scandalous reason. It was very human reasons. They'd grown apart, or it turns out that they and their spouses just disagreed over really fundamental things like whether or not to have kids. And so I wanted to let Lachlan and his wife, Claire, know that that's okay. And I think the story makes it pretty clear that they've been drifting apart for a really long time. But of course, pulling the trigger at the end, even if you know you're unhappy, is a huge decision. And then when Abby comes into it, she's so deep in denial once she starts to feel the romantic side of this relationship, because she's thinking he's this incredible footballer and I've just gotten out of a relationship and there's no way that this is actually happening. And so it takes her a really long time to realize the parallels in their situations. And I'm definitely aware that the book operates in this gray zone. It's definitely an emotional affair, but I do think that she and Lachlan draw a line that they're not willing to cross. I was interested in exploring that. And then I was really, really keen to not demonize Claire, the ex wife. I didn't want her to be a caricature. I didn't want her to be this, meanie that everyone is relieved he's well shot of. I wanted her to be an equal part in this story and to have her own hopes and dreams and what life looks like for her on the other side of that marriage and how it's going to allow her to become what she wants to be. So it was very intentional about putting all three of them through it and then trying to land the plane and hoping that everybody can get the happily ever after, not just the central couple.
Yeah, and I have to say, I think you did that really well. Some of the interactions, especially between Claire and Abby, towards the end, really kind of show off that thinking. So, actually, Anna, you and Edward, you both have sports themed romances. So, what made you decide on these particular sports? How much of your experience, how much of research had to go into it? Edward, let's start with you.
I was a theater kid growing up. I did not care at all about sports. I cannot express how much I did not care about sports. My sister was the sporty one. She played basketball. And so it's really, really, really wild that I wrote a sports romance. And here's what happened. I I was looking for outlets to work on my mental health, and a great way to do that is to be outside, exercise, work on your physical health too, and that was really never a priority for me. So I went to the US Open every year since I lived in New York just for the vibes. I didn't care about watching the tennis. I was paying $24 for a honeydews and just being there and just hanging out with New Yorkers watching tennis. But a few years ago, I went there and I just caught myself like really getting into the matches. And I was like, I think that I like this. I want to start playing it. So I signed up for lessons. I started watching tennis on TV. I started reading books. Open by Andre Agassi is like an amazing biography. And yeah, I became absolutely obsessed. It became my entire personality. So I accidentally researched this book because I had no plan to write a book about it. I just I couldn't get it off of my brain, and I also was looking for openly gay players to watch and support. And of course, there are a few women, but there were zero men. I couldn't get that idea out of my head. Like, why haven't we seen one? So I decided to will it into existence with this book.
And obviously you did. I mean, look at the last couple of years.
It's all lined up.
Oh, definitely. Anna, how about you and football?
Yeah, I was also a theater kid, but in a big sports family. But if I can make a really broad generalization, I think like most American and probably Canadian families, we just didn't care about soccer at a professional level. You watch football, you watch basketball, you watch baseball, that's it. So I had always just kind of dismissed it as a sport. And then when I was in college, I had this just unbelievable crush on a guy in my dorm. And it turns out he was a big soccer fan. And because I wanted to spend more time with him, I became a big soccer fan. um, Spoiler alert, it didn't work out, but it did give me one of the best relationships of my life, which is my relationship with Liverpool FC, which is the real life team that Mersey, the fictional team, is based on. And that has been almost 20 years now that I have loved this team. Very high highs, very low lows. And a few years ago, I was really into watching their socials, and it just felt to me that these players were friends first and teammates second. And I just couldn't stop thinking how awesome it would be to watch that and to be around those guys who are athletes at the absolute pinnacle of their careers, but also have these really fun relationships with each other. And sports provoke such strong emotions, just like love and hate, just like romance. So it was really fun to be able to explore those spaces simultaneously and play them off each other and think about where those emotions dovetail, think about where they contrast, and pretend to work at my favorite football club.
Thank you. Elizabeth and Lavanya, your books lean into entertainment, movies, TV interests, and the culture that's really kind of behind them. How did you work the effects of those medias into your characters' stories? Elizabeth, let's start with you.
So I think the primary piece of that was just that in the end, Theo, he didn't want to be a part of this at all. He didn't want to be a spectacle. He had been in this social circle in England where that's or the UK that's not done. And so, he was reluctant all the way, right? And also worried that Bex was going to be obnoxious on camera, which she was.
Mhm.
But then in the end, he was the one who ended up having to go public and be this very willing participant and reveal himself. So I think that was just one more way of him letting his guard down.
Yeah, definitely. Lavanya, how about you?
Yeah, one of my favorite things that I got to write this book is like it's an homage and loosely based on my favorite Bollywood movie called DDLJ. And so I was able to just sort of bring some of the storytelling structures that exist in that medium and those cultures. And in the book, one of the characters calls she names a genre of Bollywood movies, and she calls it the rom-com fam dram, which is a story that's basically a romantic comedy meets a family drama, and there's elements of romance and comedy and drama all within it, and it's very apt to describe a lot of Bollywood movies. It's also really apt to describe my book. Even though contemporary romance and rom-com might be what it's like bisect under or shelved under, there is it was really like fun and lovely to be able to sort of create this hybrid genre. And once I did, I started thinking about it a little bit more about rom-com fam drams in the Western pop culture canon. And I think there's more than we realize. We just don't necessarily call them that. I think Crazy Rich Asians is a great example of one.
Mhm.
I think movies like The Family Stone or even Gilmore Girls are like these exactly have all those elements. And I even convinced someone who was like a diehard Nora Ephron fan that Sleepless in Seattle is a rom-com fandom because of how important the father-son relationship is
Yeah,
in there. So it was really wonderful to sort of draw the DNA from what I thought was like one type of cultural storytelling and realize that it actually exists in my book, and in so many of the stories that I love myself.
great. So, all of you, I want to talk about the spice. That's always something in romance that people will enjoy at many different levels. And all of you have different spice levels in your stories. So, were these deliberate choices from the beginning, or did they actually develop as you were writing? Um, Elizabeth, let's start with you.
So this is my first traditionally published novel, but I think it's my 22nd book overall. So I just didn't want to disappoint like my regular audience. They expected a certain level of spice, so I kind of knew going in exactly what it was going to be. I actually hate writing those scenes. So yeah, but I was like, I got to do it, and then I was told you got to put another one in there, so I put another one in there.
And how about you?
Yeah, it was definitely deliberate in my case, because I cared so deeply about wanting to get the friendship right that I knew the spice was going to be not secondary, but it was like by definition going to be more minimal because it's not happening until they've really had this deep connection. I always thought of it as like they had to love each other before they could lust after each other. So that's how it ended up.
Great. Edward.
Being a queer sports romance in 2026, I'm of course getting a lot of heated rivalry comparisons. And one early reader said it's like heated rivalry, but more sweet than spicy. Or like heated rivalry's younger brother. So yeah, expect like one chili pepper of spice. I think in this 2 week time frame, I tried to be realistic with what actually could develop between these two strangers from the start, and then much more than that. But you will you'll get a chili pepper of things.
All right. Excellent. Lavanya, how about you?
Yeah, I think much like Edward, the logistics for these characters who are like in this wedding house that's like busier than rush hour on the train at rush hour, they're just like it wasn't logical for them to be able to have a ton of privacy. So there's a little spice, but it is on the lower end, but there's a lot of like yearning to touch the person who you were with but can't, and that also felt very Bollywood to me because it's very much like this idea of like there's a barrier between you and the person you want to be with. So I really enjoyed that part of it, even though it's not directly spice.
Excellent. So I always love to ask my authors, the last question on this panel is, what are you reading now? Or maybe you just finished reading. Anna?
I've been obsessed with the Artemis mission and how beautiful it is on a cosmic scale. So I'm about to start reading Into the Blue by Emma Brody, which from everything I've read about it so far, I think is going to kind of destroy me in a similar scale
Yeah.
in a great way.
Excellent. Edward.
I just finished reading a book that's coming out this summer called International Relations by Zach Hammett. It's a queer romance set in London, and it's a fake marriage, which is very, very good, and it's a great time hanging out in London and a little bit of Greece.
Excellent. Lavanya.
I was not unmuted. I did the thing. I at any given time am always reading like four books because I'm a mood reader and I
Mhm.
also have ADHD, so it just like helps me. And so some of the four books or three of the four books that I'm reading one called How to Commit a Post-Colonial Murder by Nina McConley, Where the Wildflowers Grow by Tara Shelton, and Trope Sick by Lauren Oakey.
Excellent. Those sound really great. And Elizabeth, how about you?
Um, similarly, I was kind of reading two at the same time, but I just finished Yellow Face, which was amazing. And then on a very different note, I read my friend Candy Steiner's book, Love Overboard, which I think comes out this week. And it's sort of like a below deck like setup reality TV romance. And it was very cute.
Oh, these all sound fabulous. So I want to thank all of our authors for this wonderful discussion. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. Next, we are going to have our final session of the day, the closing keynote with Jacinda Ardern. Enjoy and happy reading, everyone. Bye.